Good morning. I'm sorry about the delay there in getting the technology to work. I think the only thing I'd say about that is when you find that you yourselves are doing presentations, do familiarise yourself with the technology first, because quite often it's strange. I've called this lecture, I've still got a computer thing there, and I hope I can get rid of that. I've called this lecture Surrender to Gender. It touches on technology. Just a minute. Right. And that came back last time. Sorry. Right. Dim. Select. Dim. Okay, we're going to live with a blue thing in the corner there, because I don't know how to get rid of it. I'm so sorry. Okay. Basically, this is an opportunity to think about the relationship between gender and design. I'm thinking particularly about design rather than art. I know that you've got an essay that you're going to do, and I'm sure that in doing it you're going to be quite clear about what it is that you're doing, and you'll try and find relevant sources that will help you to answer whatever questions it is that you've set yourself. I would invite you, in doing this kind of work, never to forget that one of the sources to which you can always refer is yourself. And in thinking about this, I would invite you to ask yourself, firstly, do you have a gender? Might seem an odd question, but I'm just asking you to ask yourself that. And if your answer is yes, where do you think it comes from? Is it something that you were born with? Or is it something that you've learnt to do? I'll leave that hanging in the air for a moment, because fundamentally that is the opposition that we're going to have here. And I've called this an open-ended speculation. What this isn't is the thing that you might need to do in your essays, where you set up a very clear research question, consider evidence and come to a conclusion. I have thought about these things for several years, and I don't feel that I'm in a position actually to offer you a complete conclusion about what these things might be. What I can do is examine some kinds of evidence and reflect on the issues connected with this. So, sorry, under that blue bit, I don't know whether to try and get rid of it, because I'm afraid of it all disappearing. I'll just tell you what it says under there. It says, what is gender? Now, there is a suggestion, and it comes from a number of people, but principally Judith Butler, that gender is performative. Now, I think we ought to listen to what she has to say.
It's one thing to say that gender is performed, and that's a little different from saying gender is performative. When we say gender is performed, we usually mean that we've taken on a role, we're acting in some way, and that our acting or our role playing is crucial to the gender that we are and the gender that we present to the world. To say that gender is performative is a little different, because for something to be performative means that it produces a series of effects. We act and walk and speak and talk in ways that consolidate an impression of being a man or being a woman. You know, I was walking down the street in Berkeley when I first arrived several years ago, and a young woman who was, I think, in high school leaned out of her window and she yelled, "Are you a lesbian?" And she was looking to harass me. Or maybe she was just freaked out, or she thought I looked like I probably was one and wanted to know. But instead I just turned around and I said, "Yes, I am." And that really shocked her. we act as if that being of a man or that being of a woman is actually an internal reality or something that's simply true about us, a fact about us. Actually, it's a phenomenon that's being produced all the time and reproduced all the time. So to say gender is performative is to say that nobody really is a gender from the start. I know it's controversial, but that's my claim. Think about how difficult it is for sissy boys, or how difficult it is for tomboys to function socially without being bullied, or without being teased, or without sometimes suffering threats of violence. Or without their parents intervening to say, maybe you need a psychiatrist, or why can't you be normal? So, there are institutional powers, like psychiatric normalization, and there are informal kinds of practices, like bullying, which try to keep us in our gendered place. There's a real question for me about how such gender norms get established and policed, and what the best way is to disrupt them and to overcome the police function. It's my view that gender is culturally formed, but it's also a domain of agency or freedom. It's most important to resist the violence that is imposed by ideal gender norms, especially against those who are gender different, who are non-conforming in their gender presentation.
Okay, now that's a particular view. I'm not saying that we need to subscribe to it, but the main issues that come to the fore there, and again, I invite you to think about this in connection with yourselves. Where does gender come from? Judith Butler's answer is that it is cultural, and that it is realized, and notice she draws a distinction between performing, and I suppose we could, hang on. Performing, okay, maybe that is gender as a performance, literally a performance where somebody comes on stage and performs the thing that they claim to be. Notice that Judith Butler, who I hesitate to ascribe a gender to her, but she was saying, we've got to be really careful where the genders are sort of blurring, and notice that the issue of gender and sexual orientation seems to be quite closely tied up there. But from Judith Butler's point of view, gender is cultural, and it is performative, and that is to say, not that it's a performance, which is a sort of act. I'm doing an act now, look at me, I'm acting. But sort of the ordinary interactions of our ordinary lives where we're doing things, and we're doing things in the manner of a man or in the manner of a woman, or not, as the case may be. And she says that this business of gender is policed by institutions, and one of the institutions that she names is psychiatry. Now, we constantly interact with society and we present ourselves to society. We are designed objects. Each of us designed ourselves this morning when we got up and put some clothes on in order to present ourselves to the world. Designed objects have social value, so it's inevitable that many of them, perhaps the majority, have a gender dimension where we sign up to or reject according to how people are then going to think of us and allocate to us a gender, the gender we choose to present to the world. So, is gender performative? Here we have Suzanne Moore. Suzanne Moore said that when she was growing up, anyone could be anything, in theory. And the theory was Judith Butler, who we just heard there, Michel Foucault, Julia Kristeva, Leo Bersani, and those guys. Gender, we thought, was just a performance. She's conflated performance and performative, don't worry. A social construct, though no one ever explained why we are compelled to repeat the same performance over and over again. And when Suzanne Moore was growing up and when I was growing up, these things were live issues. She said, I had a baby, which was somehow more than performative. Now, the point about that seems, having a baby is not a flippant remark, but the thing that it's doing there is pointing not towards culture, but possibly towards biology and genetics. And that's the other side of this. A little thing that we might want to think about. Was modernism masculine and white? And by modernism, I'm talking about the big stuff happening in the 20th century, the Bauhaus, and I thought we'd just have a momentary look at Le Corbusier there with his Voisin car that he absolutely adored. He's put his hand on it now. It's probably hot because he drove quite fast, and he enjoyed it. He loved machines, absolutely adored machines, and used them to inform his designs. So I'm just starting to suggest here that there possibly is a link between men and machines. I'm not saying whether it's biological or cultural, okay? But I'm suggesting that for mid-20th century modernism, that's what was fundamentally there. And here we see La Ville Contemporaine, which is Le Corbusier's remodeling of Paris, where, of course, what you do, just like they had actually done in the early 19th century, you demolish Paris and rebuild it along better lines, all deeply informed by machinery. Notice the helicopters, the aeroplanes, and the rest of it. And of course, in furniture, you start to get furniture which, rather than making reference to the domestic perhaps conventionally feminine spheres, makes reference to machinery, to the outside world, to the masculine. And of course, these chairs were all designed by Le Corbusier, or not. They were designed chiefly by this woman here, Charlotte Perriand. And occasionally in the histories she gets some billing, but in some conventions of the histories, she doesn't get much billing at all. And you are told, those designs are designed by Le Corbusier. So I'm just bringing her on as a possible and perhaps useful contradiction to any conventions we might be starting to make in our minds. Another little, just an excursion. I'm asking here, are buildings gendered? We're in a building now. Does this building have a gender? Do most buildings have genders? An insight into this came to me when I was waiting outside Westminster Cathedral. I don't know if you know it, it's not Westminster Abbey, this is the Catholic job. My partner's a Catholic, he was in there with his mother, they'd just gone to Mass. I was the chauffeur. I was a bit bored, so I did what anybody who was bored would do, which is I'm standing out there and I think, ooh, I'll just find out about this building. So I put in Westminster Cathedral and I saw what came there. And it's a wonderful building. I do recommend it to you. Do go and have a look at it. And I came across this fantastic quote. And it said, after a visit by architects from RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, in 1900, Sir William Blake Richmond declared he had rarely been so impressed as when first entering that original and manly structure. Now, manly? Manly? Why should a building from 1900 be manly? And so I had time to think about it, and then of course I worked it out. It was Dear Oscar. In 1895 there'd been this famous trial of Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde primarily associated with the aesthetic movement, art for art's sake and the rest of it, and condemned absolutely for being unmanly, with the result that in Britain, unlike perhaps in the rest of Europe, there was a real suspicion connected with aesthetics, that possibly aesthetics risked being feminine and weak. I'm just doing the voices of the time, these are not things I think. Feminine, weak, and potential threats to masculinity. Whereas this building was judged by this particular critic to be manly. And there we had the Police News, which was the, I don't know, it would be a YouTube video clip these days, but essentially the scandal that was associated with Oscar Wilde only a few years earlier. Conventionally, when thinking about buildings, it is often suggested that some buildings are masculine because of their resemblance to parts of the masculine anatomy. Here we can see a forest of them at Dubai. There is another example, which is the New People's Daily at Beijing, a remarkable structure, of which it was said, although neither the architect nor the city government has admitted it, the New People's Daily building looks exactly like a penis. And as could be expected, the building's unveiling has elicited no small amount of sniggering among the Chinese public. On Sina Weibo, one sarcastic commentator even congratulated the newspaper for, quote, needing just 5 billion RMB, about $900 million, to entertain the world. So, buildings might be gendered to the extent that they're phallic. Let me extend your vocabulary. There's another word. That word is yonic. Okay? And I think I only need to say that as far as phallic is over here and to do with men, then yonic is over here and to do with women. And here we can see some examples which it has been suggested are yonic. One that's been in the news for other reasons most recently, and which my colleague Helena used in a lecture not too long ago, Zaha Hadid's proposal for the stadium in Qatar that is presently being built. Helena asked, is it deliberately political? And she thought it must be. If you take the context of a quite severely rigorous Arabic country. Maybe, maybe not. Now, gendered objects are everywhere. But when you leave this room, I want you to have your sort of gender antennae attuned and try and decide the things that you see, is this masculine, feminine, or neither, or both. All right? So, I'm just going to pick some everyday examples. In considering these, I've put out there Judith Butler's idea of gender being performative, okay? So in looking at these objects, maybe what we ask ourselves is, do they provide evidence that gender is performative? The other day I arrived at work and I went to the loo, felt my chin and realised I hadn't shaved. Rushed out, determined to go and buy some disposable razors and have a shave so that I could present myself to the world. I went and found the razors in the pan shop. I don't know if you can tell, but they are very, very gendered. Over here, lots of things. Well, over here is the men's ones, okay? Blue, always good for men. Yellow, not got a gender particularly over there. And then over here, very, very pink, okay? Lots of pink, reassuringly pink, and the word lady in big letters. I won't comment on that for the moment because we're going to look at another example. On the basis of that, I'm going to make my first proposition. Designs are more overtly gender-coded where there is a gender norm. This is just a suggestion, all right? But on the basis of that, it seems to me that it might be possible. So we're starting to build an idea. There's the razors. And the gender norm is men shave, men shave. So if there's a gender norm there like that, then maybe when it comes to marketing and presenting the razors for women, you need that. It seems that the design needs to say women, lady, pink, much more loudly than perhaps the masculine norm. Let's try another one. Handbags, okay? I think we can safely say that conventionally handbags are seen as feminine. So what do you do when you get a bag for a man? What you have to do is, just as you're no, you don't have to, but I'm saying this is what has happened. Just as there are conventions about what are expected of women. So I mean, if we went back, we had the pink there. Sorry, can we go back? There we go. We had the pink, we had the gilts, the tassel, okay? Here with the man bag, obviously you're not going to have pink, all right? I mean, and isn't it funny how we just know these things as if they were natural, as if they were natural. Could be pink, could have a tassel, but no. Notice that it's right, black, always good for men. Always, no questions asked, black, serious, okay? And then notice it's got a little bit of sort of designer wear to it. This is deliberate, because as you know, men, we are creatures of action. We do things, all right? Practical things. So signs that there's some sort of practical thing going on there, and notice that it's got the clasp, but it looks like it's practical. Could have been taken from a practical thing. And sometimes with bags for men, you get the extreme of it actually being an imitation of a military bag. Military is good. Violence is good. Men do violence. That's masculine. So have a bag that's got it there, okay? All very reassuring. Not pink, not girly. Why are these things like this? Why are they like this? Right. Jewellery. Jewellery, girly. If you put jewellery on a man, risks not being girly, but something quite different. I'm making a serious point here, that the whole business of gender identity has historically been connected to sexual orientation. We live in a mixed world now, where those assumptions in our society are not necessarily as straightforward as they seemed to be in the past. So if jewellery tends to be gendered towards women, and if jewellery is designed for men, of course, what you get is the men's collection. Classic, modern, masculine. Now, if this jewellery were designed for women, you might have classic and you might have modern. You might even have, but you wouldn't have women's collection, would you? Would anybody consider a selection of jewellery, say, women's jewellery? Not unless there was a sort of men's jewellery to compare it with, because it would be assumed the jewellery was for women. And then masculine. I don't think women would need reassuring that jewellery was feminine. Again, there are, if you like, there. So this is me trying to test that first proposition. And so far, on the basis of the evidence that I'm presenting, it looks like it might be true. There is another way for men to come at jewellery, culturally specific. And we can see that there. Notice that this is the first time I will make this observation, but I will make this observation a number of times. Can you see that in terms of personal apparel, or indeed in terms of design, when you start to get extremes of masculinity, it's always borderline camp. I'm not sure why. And believe me, I really have thought about this. But it seems to be borderline camp. Now, perfume. Okay? All there. And when it's aimed at men, this is the promise. Men. Now, notice that he's looking out. And he's not looking at women unless he's looking at women saying, you want your man to treat you like this, something like that. So basically, he's looking out to the insecure man. All men are insecure. Some women are insecure, but all men are insecure. And what he's saying is, spray yourself with this, and they'll just, straight like that. That's going to sell the perfume, that really, especially to me. I mean, you can imagine. I'm just there, head of the queue. So here's another one. Apparently, for the smell of Emporio Armani diamonds for men. For men, it's perfume for men. All right. Women they just go wild. They just start undressing him. It's amazing. Who wouldn't want some of this stuff? And it was happening in the 80s as well with wide lapels, extraordinary. And here's another one. Oh God, it's gone borderline camp again. It absolutely has. And of course, you can push this because the makers of perfume, they've got a real sense of what this is about. And bless him, Jean-Paul Gaultier, he's just gone one stage further and said, campus tits, marvellous. So, I mean, that's an example of this in our contemporary world actually being celebrated. It's a bit like, you know, we're sufficiently relaxed. I can have campus tits perfume, you know, on my bathroom shelf, and nobody is going to think that I am automatically, well, then again, they might. One would have to see. So, now, this is my second proposition. So far we've been looking at culture, we've been looking at stuff. Second proposition. Some of this is genetic. There should be an is in there. I'm sorry I left the word is out. Some of this is genetic. I have a colleague, Gloria Moss, for whom I have considerable respect, who has written a book called Gender, Design and Marketing. I commend it to you. It represents a point of view. In considering the evidence, Gloria has come to the conclusion that fundamentally the vast majority of things connected with gender and design and marketing of the kind that we've been looking at there has an evolutionary basis. Okay? This book is flying off the shelves. Manufacturers can't get enough of it. And I suppose the reason is that from their point of view, it seems to offer a very clear and perhaps simple account of how these things work. People can get their heads around that. Now, another person had a bit of a think about this a little while back and wrote this PhD, of which he's tolerably proud. Never made it to become a book, and no, I'm not bitter. But what I was looking at there was the extent to which evolutionary theory can help explain how and why humans attribute significance and meaning to the material world and the consequence of this for understanding design. So just a nice little modest thing, you know, that I played around with for 4 or 5 years. And I obviously also had a think about the extent to which, in a much wider sphere, culture or genetics and evolutionary stuff affected how we react to design. Just to give you a very, very simple example, not that you would, but, well, the flags of most violent right-wing political outfits tend to be red, white and black. The colour schemes of many pornographic websites, so I'm told, tends to be red, white and black, or red and black if it's a bit, you know. Whoa. And the reason for that is there is several reasons for that. Part of it's cultural, but a lot of it is to do with we are descended all from the same forms of life, and the forms of life that we are descended for, and I'm not just talking, you know, hominids, animals, I'm talking amoeba right back. The first thing that our ancestor species became aware of was the presence of light, the absence of light. That's black and white taken care of. And then the third was almost certainly red, because it meant food, it meant sex, and it meant danger. All things that in an evolutionary context we needed to know about. Everything else, the lavender, the green, the whatever, all of those colour attributions are much, much later. Now, that model, I think, probably applies here too. And I would argue, and Gloria and I could have a discussion about this, but I would argue that this thing that we're thinking about does not have a simple explanation. I really don't think it has. I think it's complex. I think a good part of it is evolutionary, so that slightly runs counter to the Judith Butler version of things where it's wholly cultural, but a lot of it is cultural. And if you think about it from a political point of view, if it's, quote, evolutionary, then it's natural, then you can't do anything about it. That's a coarse version of it. If it's cultural, then it can be changed and it's mutable, as Judith Butler was saying. You know, it becomes an area for agency. So, you know, I could choose. I could have done this in a dress. I tried a dress on over the summer, but it was too small. I could do it in a dress. I could modify these things if they were cultural. So, I would honestly say to you, if anybody offers a very simple explanation of how these things work, I would argue that it's an incomplete explanation. And you need invariably to allow for the complexity of these things, but that is not a reason not to consider both the evolutionary arguments and the cultural ones, especially if you are engaging in these things. You need to think about them. So, the evolutionary argument goes that some of the evolutionary arguments suggest that men and women's brains are wired differently. And here we see a very pleasing and probably simplistic diagram showing men's brains in a reassuring blue and women's brains in orange, because if they'd done it in pink, the game would have been up, really. And here we have something from BBC News Health. Men and women's brains are wired differently. Men and women's brains are connected in different ways, which may explain why the sexes excel at certain tasks, say researchers. In the study, just listen to this, all right? In the study, women scored well on attention, word and face memory, and social cognition, while men perform better on spatial processing and sensory motor speed. Okay, so there we are, there's the technology for the men, and the women all social and natural. Study author Dr. Ruben Gur said, "It's quite striking how complementary the brains of women and men really are. Fabulous, so apparently marriages are made in heaven, marvellous." And then we have another source. Men and women do not have different brains, claims neuroscientist. Neuroscientist Professor Gina Rippon claims male and female brains only differ because of the relentless drip, drip, drip of gender stereotyping. So we have a scientific authority saying genetic in origin, men and women have different brains, and another scientific authority saying, no, it's not, it's cultural. Recent studies have suggested that female brains are more suited to social skills, memory and multitasking, while men are better at perception and coordinated movement. However, speaking on International Women's Day, Professor Rippon will claim that any differences in brain circuitry only come about through the drip, drip, drip of gender stereotyping. She says, "The bottom line is that saying there are differences in male and female brains is just not true. This is pretty compelling evidence that any differences are tiny, and they are the result of environment, not biology," said Professor Rippon. Now, if you're mounting an argument yourself and you get one source that says, this is true, and then you get another source that says, no, it's not, this is true, what do? I think you do what I'm doing, which is that you present both sides of the argument. I've already suggested to you what I believe to be the truth, which is some almost wishy-washy middle ground, if you like, that there's a bit of both involved. But you should always allow the contradictory evidence. You don't make an argument stronger by ignoring the evidence that runs counter to what you want to say. So, what causes this pattern of study here at Bucks? This is from last year. Here we have a course, total, male, female. Here we have textiles, total 109, male 1, female 108. Music management and studio production, total 79. Male 68, female 11. That's music production. That's a really, really technical one where you have to have a fundamental understanding of technology, okay? Now, I'm not saying, never mind what I'm not saying. Let's have another one. Advertising, 87, 44, 43, okay? So, I think you can see from those statistics that at least they're suggesting that there seems to be some division between men and women. It does not show whether it's cultural or whether it has some fundamental evolutionary and genetic element. And advertising is a particularly interesting one. If you were to do a study of that course, I can remember that course 20 years ago. It was lads. It was absolutely lads. It was a lad culture. And that, in my own time, has come to be much, much more evenly balanced. So, if things can change, that would suggest that there's definitely a cultural element in there somewhere. Shan't do that. Do this. Here we go. Come on.
Now on, girl. Think pink. Think pink when you shop for summer clothes. Think pink. Think pink if you want that kelpie shows. Red is dead. Blue is through. Green's obscene. Brown's taboo. And there is not the slightest excuse for plum abuse. Or chartreuse. Think pink. Forget that Dior says black and rust. Think pink. Who cares if the new must. Now, I wouldn't presume to tell a woman what a woman ought to think, but tell her if she's gotta think. Think pink. For bags, pink for shoes, razzle, dazzle, grab the news. The pink's for the lady who's trying to be. Pink's for all the family. Try pink shampoo. Pink toothpaste too. Lay in pink all day in pink. Play in pink. Thrive in pink. Come alive in pink. And dive in pink. Go out dancing, but just remember one thing. You can get a little pink if you got a little pink in your spring. Pink, 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 pink is the latest white you know. Pink, 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 and you like a Batchelor. Feels so gay, feels so bright, makes your day, makes your night. Pink is now the color to which you gotta switch. To which you gotta switch. Every stitch you switch. Pink, 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 pink on the long, long road ahead. On the road, pink, 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 and the world is rosy red. Everything's rosy. Everything on the great line. Everything that you can think, and that includes the kitchen sink. Pink, pink,
Okay, that was just a little reminder, I suppose, probably of the cultural element, if you like. 1957, and would have made complete sense to the audience at which it was aimed. Anybody who now Googles pink on Wikipedia can say, it used to be a standard colour for boys in the 18th century. Was a way in which you marked out that a child was a boy by dressing him in pink. So that tends to suggest that that particular bias may not be wholly evolutionary in origin. So, right. Third proposition. Designs and design choices are seen by some as agents of change. And this is the point where we bring back Judith Butler. Agents of change. You can make decisions about design that maybe can alter the thing, if the thing is cultural. So just recently, we've had campaigns against gendered toys. If it is perhaps undesirable that some of these ideas should be propagated, then there's a body of liberal thought that says, well, you know, we don't have to play along with this, we can change this. And here we can see this, you know, nice girl dressed in pink in a pink car. We know the pink car is for her and not for her brother. This does not have to be. And then you can get these books. Notice here, you've got illustrated classics for girls, illustrated classics for boys. Illustrated classics for girls has a girl in nature, all right, surrounded by animals. She's not going anywhere. Whereas in the classics for boys, he's on a horse and he's going somewhere. And it's blue and it's pink. So those things could be challenged and probably should be. Yes, now there is part of the campaign, Let Toys Be Toys, which began towards the end of 2012 as a result of a thread on parenting website Mumsnet about the explicit gendering of toys. Notice the use of social media there to challenge some of these things. In the space of a year, the campaign has convinced 12 major retailers, including Boots, Toys R Us and Marks & Spencer's, to remove girls and boys signages on toy displays. Right. You don't have to look far to see that this gendering in toys is quite rigorous and commonplace. There we have some examples. Okay, so, you know, Butch here doing things, Tonka toys, paramilitary, My Little Pony, Pink, 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 Touch Me, Feel Me, Touch Me, Feel Me, Battle Force 5, Fuse, Hot Wheels, Barbie, A Fairy Secret. So, and we got some more here, just to prove that this is found around the world, although I don't know whether this points to the dominance of Western culture. It might. There's the boys, all sort of fire and danger, and the girls, big eyes and social. I mean, this stuff is actually potentially, I mean, we've got military bloody turtles, forgive me the language, but aimed at boys because they're sort of like that. Yeah, okay, well, you get the picture. Now, this can be counted. This can be counted. This doesn't have to work like this. So, obviously, the thing that you possibly need to do is to introduce a range of guns for girls. That may be misspelled. But I invite you to ask whether you think this is desirable. I'm not going to take a position myself, but I think it raises as many issues as it addresses. Boys, technology and the design of war. There's a boy, 1958, and what he's got is a Christmas present that he asked for. It's a little Betty sewing machine. Yes, it's me. And my grandmother said to my mother, "What did you go and buy him a thing like that for?" And my mother, bless her, said he asked for it. Now, the thing that I want to share with you here is that the thing that attracted me as a little boy to a sewing machine was not sewing. I didn't particularly want to sew. I wanted a machine where if you did that, it sewed. You know, miraculously, it would do this thing. I loved it as a machine. And I hadn't been exposed to a lot of culture at that stage. Possibly slightly more than my grandmother. Oh, there's my grandfather. He was forever challenging stereotypes. Here we can see him in Kentish Town, also in about 1958, having won something. Now, Morrissey said, "War, I thought, was the most negative aspect of male heterosexuality. Riding in a tank is used in these two images, one of Thatcher in 1986, the other of Putin. Now, to different gendered effects." So, Morrissey's saying that he considers war a heterosexual activity. That's a very striking observation. And when there's so much war in the world at the moment, or seems to be quite a lot of war in the world at the moment, I invite you to reflect on whether that has a gendered dimension as well. Here we can see a man cave full of technology with a Porsche with the lights on, sexily glittering there. And I dare say if we looked in detail, there's sort of, you know, famous riders, the motorbikes, the tools, the workbench. There's probably a bit of pornography stashed away there somewhere, who knows. Here we are. I said extremes of masculinity tend to be camp. Here we can see Arnold Schwarzenegger tending to be camp in about 1968 when he was in his full bodybuilding mode. So, Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Humvee. Okay? In 1989, says Steve Parker in the Huffington Post, Arnold was making the film Kindergarten Cop in Oregon. One day, while driving on a freeway to the set, he saw a military convoy on the other side of the road. A convoy featuring several Humvees. Never having seen one before, Arnold went nuts. He crossed the median of the highway to chase down the convoy. When they made a rest stop, Arnold started checking out the Humvees and talking with the military people, driving them and travelling in them. Arnold Schwarzenegger's determination to own a Hummer of his own resulted in AM General making a civilian version of its ubiquitous military truck. "It has balls," is what Arnold said about the truck. So there he is in his later political guise as a Republican politician. Now, my mobility vehicle, wheel vehicle, is a Humvee. Never mind that. So, obviously, it is profoundly masculine. It has violence built into it. It's got aggression built into it. It's available in other colours. Heavens, you could have other colours once it became a civilian object. And do you know, you could have one in pink. I don't sense that this lady is going to be the driver, however. A slightly more ambiguous and disturbing image. You can also have it as a limousine with all sorts of wonderful interior, somewhere to keep the cocktails cold and anything else that might be imbibed. Now, Here we've got Call of Duty, a computer game. Not exclusively, but these computer games tend to be masculine. Here we see the hero, military, all the rest of it. I have to say that I look at that and I wonder who sewed his uniform in this fantasy world. You know, where did it come from? Who made it? If we're going to have the complete fantasy world, I want to know those things. A suggestion that women fight on the front line. We're coming back to this. Defense Secretary tells Army to end macho image. And here we see a picture of a woman soldier, sadly, who was killed. But some of those barriers are now breaking down. And we need to think about that. War is actually ugly. It's not like that computer game. It's really savage. This is an interesting piece of sculpture called Where Souls Dwell by Lila Shawa. Next to drones, this gun, the AK-47, is the biggest killing machine in the world. Due to its cheap production by everyone, it is in the hands of everyone, including children. The butterflies in world mythology represent the souls killed by the gun and their return to the place or cause of their death. So that's using art, perhaps, as a way of commenting on this agency. And I can't leave all of that without alerting you to this book by Steven Pinker, The Better Angels of Our Nature. Steven Pinker has done some very serious work, and his suggestion is that although we hear more and more about the violence in the world, and it's shocking, it's genuinely shocking, I'm not detracting from that at all. In fact, if you do the number crunching, amount of violence in proportion to number of people is decreasing, and decreasing all the time. It has reverses now and again, but you can monitor it year on year, and he shows fairly conclusively that it is changing. Now, if that is so, and if war is, as Morrissey said, the recreation of heterosexual males, there's something pretty profound going on there. And that level of change suggests that even if something might be some sort of genetic given, a genetic given does not mean that it has to be accepted and that it's not mutable. And that culture is not also an agent in changing it. Now, before I leave you, I just want to conduct a little experiment with your help. And I'm going to turn the lights on because, with your permission, we are now going to... I had a walk in High Wycombe. I don't often walk in High Wycombe, but I did have a walk, and I knew I was giving this lecture, and I came across that shop. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Menkind. Witty. I like that kind of thing. So I thought, right, I'm doing this lecture, I'll go in, I'll find out what men are like. So I went in and I found out what men were like. Essentially, men like things connected with beer, things connected with sport, things connected with military violence and stuff like that. And so I bought a piece of evidence, this, the M-Tech Gyro Flyer V2. Notice the paramilitary naming of this. This is not called Jennifer, okay? So, what we're going to do now, and each of you needs to, watch this, okay? And what I want you to do is I want you to ask yourself, how does this make me feel? All right, how does this make me feel? All right, I'm not going to ask you to tell me afterwards. I want you to tell one another afterwards. But if some of the ideas that we've been looking at, well, look, it's flashing. That's good. I think I'll put it there where it's flat. All right. Now, is that flashing? That's flashing. And I think, if I remember rightly, okay. So here we have it. We have a product from Menkind. Oh, come on. Whoa. Oh, men aren't what they used to be. Hang on a minute. Let's try that again. Just a moment. Now. Now, if that's exciting, why and to whom? I've stopped now. All right, there we go. Okay. So there we had a practical exercise in potentially gendered design. It's flashing at me now. I don't think it liked that. Look, I promised you that I was not going to offer you a coherent conclusion, and I haven't. You're not allowed to do that. You have to have a go at a coherent conclusion. But I'm upfront about it. What I've tried to do is examine a number of the key issues connected with this particular thing. And what I would invite you to do is to take those issues away and think about them. In a way, you can't avoid it. You're in the world. Each of you relates in some way or another to ideas of gender that are in the world, and they affect who you are, they affect how you act, they affect anything that you do when you come to creating objects of whatever kind they might be they works of art, or be they designs, whatever. That is it. Thank you very much.